GagePrimarCrushBackPain.com. In the last video, we talked about lower back pain after squats and the fact that most of the time it's a result of lumbar flexion in that bottom position, in that repetitive lumbar flexion with reps during a squat set. Today we're going to show you how to address hip flexion mobility impairments, ankle dorsiflexion mobility impairments, and then we're going to also talk briefly about core stability and using a belt. So in that last video, we went over how when you squat down and you get in that bottom position, you get that lumbar flexion, and that's what bothers the lower back. So part of what can cause that is a lack of hip flexor mobility. So hip flexion is this, your knee coming up towards your chest. So if you're squatting, obviously you're getting hip flexion. If that hip flexion is tight or restricted, the flexion has to come from somewhere, so it'll come from the lumbar spine. One thing that can cause some issues with hip flexion is when the hamstrings are tight, because the hamstrings are a hip extensor, so they pull the hip back. So obviously, if the hamstrings are tight, pulling the hip back, they're going to restrict the hip flexing. So a really simple, easy way to address some hip flexor mobility impairments is to simply stretch your hamstrings. Now, when you stretch the hamstrings, you want to be very cognizant to stretch them while maintaining the lumbar spine in a neutral position. So you don't want to be going down and do a full-on stretch here where, yeah, I'm stretching my hamstrings, but my lumbar spine's flexed, especially if you're getting lower back pain after squats, because it's probably due to lumbar flexion. So you can stretch the hamstrings a bunch of different ways. You just want to maintain the lumbar spine in a neutral position, neutral to extended. One of my favorite ways to stretch the hamstrings is just with a doorway stretch, or you can use a rack. It's just whatever you have available. But basically, I'll show you here. So you just find something, a doorway, a rack, whatever. You lay down on the ground, throw your leg up there, stretch the hamstring. But you want your lower back neutral, so you should have that space in between your lower back and the floor. And what you'll notice is when you tilt that pelvis forward and get that space between your lower back and the floor, you'll get more of a hamstring stretch. If you let that back round out, you're not going to feel the stretch as much because your pelvis is tilting back and that force is going through your lumbar spine. So like if I let my back round out right now, yeah, I can feel my hamstrings a little bit. But if I maintain my lumbar spine in a neutral to extended position, I feel a strong hamstring stretch. Now, that's a simple way to do it. You can do it however you want. It doesn't really matter. The key is making sure that lumbar spine doesn't round out when you stretch your hamstrings. And I would hold that stretch for at least 60 to 90 seconds. Now, another way to address some hip flexion mobility impairment is to just have a bar, squat bar set up, and I'll show you this way. But get that bar set up and grab onto it and just come down into a full squat position, but be holding on to the bar so you can keep your spine extended. So you don't let that spine round out. You don't get, some people call it a butt wink in that bottom position. Don't let that spine round out. You're holding on to this, so my spine is neutral to extended. Back feels good, but I have basically full hip flexion right now. I mean, that's about as far as I can flex my hip. Now you may have to adjust the height of the bar, but get into that full bottom squat position, but be holding on to the bar up above you so you can maintain that lower back in a neutral position, not let it round. I mean, you can experiment too. You can get in this position, you can let that lower back round, and you'll feel it right away. Might be a little uncomfortable, might even hurt, but you can feel the lower back if you let it round. If you keep the spine neutral to extended, you will feel nothing in your lower back in this position. Again, you can get down here and just hang. You can hang out for 60, 90 seconds. You can also just do some little bounces and just get into that in-range hip flexion, again maintaining that lumbar spine in neutral. But that's another good way to work on hip flexion. Now, ankle dorsiflexion, there's several ways you can do that too, but ankle dorsiflexion is basically just the foot coming back, right? So say I'm working on ankle dorsiflexion here on my right foot. You can get down in a position like this, and literally just go back and forth. Think about bringing your tibia over your second toe. Try to keep your heel on the ground. And we're trying to work on getting that ankle to dorsiflex more. You do like 10, 15 of those on each side. You can also do that in standing against a wall or even a bar, just like this. But I'm trying to keep my left heel on the ground, bring my left tibia over my second toe. 10, 15 of those. That'll dorsiflex that ankle, because dorsiflexion can kind of move up the chain. If you have a lack of dorsiflexion, you're coming down, you need that motion. You'll round your spine to get down in that position instead of being able to come all the way down. You can also stretch the calves out, just a simple calf stretch where, you know, one leg's back, one leg's forward. You just lean forward till you're feeling a good calf stretch. Hold that, again, 60 to 90 seconds. That'll also pick up some ankle dorsiflexion. Another way to do it, with a lot of weightlifting shoes, they'll actually have an elevated heel for squatting. So you can just grab a couple plates. These are 5-pounders. I mean, you get 2.5s. You know, it doesn't matter. Experiment with it. But say you're squatting, put those guys under your heels. So you're starting out in a little bit of plantar flexion. So you're going to have more dorsiflexion by default. Sometimes that's all it takes. Okay? So that'll help you be able to squat down without getting lumbar flexion if dorsiflexion is an issue. So those are some really simple ways that you can work on improving hip flexion mobility, dorsiflexion mobility, that will allow you to squat without repetitive lumbar flexion, which in turn will allow you to squat without lower back pain. Another thing you can do that is effective, old-fashioned belt. Grab a belt, especially if you're squatting heavy or high volume or both. Cinch that thing up, get it as tight as you can get it, and then do your set. This thing, you can really pressurize that abdominal cylinder, and you can really stabilize and keep that spine neutral. Plus you have that tactile feedback. Belts are a great tool, especially when you're going heavy. When you're squatting heavy, see if I can get this thing off. This thing's a little stiff. I don't squat as heavy as I used to, so that thing doesn't get as much work as it used to. Belts are great. Another thing that helps a lot of people is core stabilization work. If your abs aren't where they need to be and your trunk musculature is not stabilizing that spinal column adequately when you are squatting, especially under load, you're going to get a little bit of what we call aberrant movement. That's just extra movement on those spinal segments. It's usually L4, 5, L5, S1. That can lead to pain because you're going to get a little more load through the disc, the facets. You want that to be as stable as you can. So good old-fashioned core stabilization training really carries over to squatting heavier, squatting more volume, and squatting heavier and volume combined. So those are some ways that you can improve your ability to squat without lower back pain afterwards. These make a difference. I would use what we went over today as far as the hip flexion and ankle dorsiflexion mobility as a warm-up. Really good warm-up is Cossack squats combined with a little ankle dorsiflexion mode. Cossack squats will get the hips opened up. You're going to work on hip flexion, and they're also going to improve ankle dorsiflexion. So Cossack squat, super simple. You're just basically in a wide stance, and let me get over here. There we go. And you just squat down as far as you can go, and then you come up and you just go the other way, and you're maintaining that lumbar spine in neutral. But whatever way you're squatting, you're going to really be working on dorsiflexion, and those hips are going to flex and mobilize too. Key with this, you don't want to let the lumbar spine round out when you're doing your Cossack squat either. You can also just work on the hip flexion mobility with the bar like we talked about, hamstring stretch, just the good old-fashioned ankle dorsiflexion, calf stretching, that sort of thing. Do those sorts of things before you squat, and then again be cognizant of not allowing your lumbar spine to flex in the bottom position of the squat. This is usually all it takes to take care of lower back pain after squats. If you have any questions, drop me a line below. If this video helps you, give me a thumbs up. Subscribe to the Crush Back Pain YouTube channel. Check back weekly for proven methods to beat back pain.